Dillon Fuder. My History Fair project is on the fight for equal rights in education.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in 1963 while struggling for racial equality. This speech was given almost 100 years after the end of the Civil War and the end of slavery in the United States. What he was struggling against was segregation, which is the separation of people based on the color of their skin. Today we'll focus on segregation in schools, but we need to start with the segregation itself. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Lincoln on January 1st, 1863. In this 5-page handwritten document, the President proclaimed that all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, and shall then thenceforward and forever free. This captured the imagination of millions of Americans and began the process to make all men equal. But the road was long and painful.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves.
It was during Lincoln's presidency, but not until after the end of the Civil War, that the 13th Amendment was written. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, nor any place subject to their jurisdiction. On January 31st, 1865, this amendment was passed by Congress. The states ratified it on December 6, 1865. This officially ended over 200 years of slavery in the United States of America, but didn't necessarily make all men equal. During the bitter period of Reconstruction following the Civil War, general segregation became commonplace in the South through the Jim Crow laws. The Jim Crow laws mandated separate public facilities for white and non-white people. If a person with any color skin but white were caught using the white-only facilities, they were often arrested, frequently beaten, or sometimes even killed. White people would be shunned and possibly also arrested or beaten, depending on the situation, if they used the colored facilities. The first challenge to these laws came when Homer Adolph Plessy, a very light-skinned black man in Louisiana, had sat in a whites-only car of the East Louisiana Railroad. He proclaimed that he was not white, and he refused to move to the colored-only car at the rear of the train. He was arrested for violating the state's segregation laws. The case eventually made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's decision on this case, called Plessy v. Ferguson, upheld the constitutionality of the state segregation laws as long as the facilities were equal. Everything from washrooms to public pools to schools began following the separate but equal rule. However, in most cases, the facilities were far from equal. For 60 years after this ruling, segregation of races became the norm. From 1952 until 1954, under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, Oliver L. Brown, a welder, pastor, and a man of color, went to court on behalf of his daughter, Linda. Linda was made to walk 6 blocks each day to a bus stop in order to ride a bus to attend Monroe Elementary, which was a colored school since Topeka, Kansas was segregated. In contrast, the all-white school, Sumner Elementary School, was just 7 blocks from her home. She would have to leave home much earlier each day to attend school, and would arrive home much later in the evening than the white children would. The case was named Brown versus the Board of Education, but other similar cases were eventually combined with this one, which made its way to the Supreme Court. All of these cases were sponsored by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. The NAACP was a civil rights organization founded in 1909. The NAACP's primary mission is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of minor groups of citizens in the United States and eliminate race prejudice. Through the judicial system process, the NAACP encouraged African Americans to enroll their children into segregated white schools, where each would be refused enrollment in order to bring this issue of segregation to court. During the trial, the Supreme Court judges considered several studies showing segregation was having a negative impact on black students. One of the more recognized and publicized studies were the Clark's doll test. In the study school, children were showed 2 identical dolls that only differed by hair and skin color. Children were asked questions like which doll was nicer and which doll was bad. Overwhelming, the black doll was shunned and the white doll was praised. The Supreme Court didn't find that separation facilities could not, by their very nature, be considered equal. The unanimous Supreme Court ruling officially ended the government-backed racial segregation, including those of public schools, finding it unconstitutional. Other hardships, other trials, the entire civil rights movement finally had to happen before the true equal rights in education was achieved. But today, Martin Luther King's dream is reality. No animals were harmed in the filming of this production.